Okay, thanks. I think we can get started. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session 3 of the panels. The group. The title of this session is China in World Capitalism. I take note. I pointed to share this session. So we will have 4 speakers. Hopefully, now the first speaker will be Chiara Polio of the University of Pereira and Siemens. I understand you're not sure sharing one. So at the moment, we are aware she might not be able to join the session. Let's wait and see. Joining online. As for now, we have another 3. So that Sam-Kee Cheng, our organizer, she's from the University of Bangkok. And then the next one is Salam from the University of everyone familiar with him. So and then myself, the last speaker. Now perhaps let's start with Sam-Kee. She will be talking about the topics that primitive socialist accumulation and the developments comparing the political economy development of the PRC and postwar Japan, which is of course a very important topic for not just for East Asia, but for the world developments. So because of the different economic systems is for a long period of time. So very important general lesson to that is the comparison. So let's have a second here.
Thank you, Professor Taylor. So, yes, I'm afraid the title is different to what we saw on the program because I changed it. I hope you will still be interested in this one. Just need to share my screen. Okay. Yes. So my presentation today is based on the paper I drafted. I received really helpful comment from very few important reviewers, Michael Roberts and Ranka Desai. So they gave me critical comments as well. So I'm still in the process of finalizing it. So there's thoughts that I'm presenting today may be a bit immature. So that's the caveat first. So I hope I will tell you the logic of argument, and I hope you can give me some feedback and your comments as well. So the title is Primitive Socialist Accumulation and Contender Development, comparing the political economy of development of postwar Japan and the People's Republic of China. So the main research questions are around this. Is China going to be another Japan? So what it means is that China can achieve economic catch-up, but will remain as a dependent development or a client state to the United States. The other question is that if China's economic development has been largely due to being a servant to the US, like its subordinated integration to the US system, how do we explain China's continuous industrial upgrade and plan to develop new productive forces which divide the assigned role as a cheap assembly hub for outsourced, low-value added industries? How did this contender development to the US hegemony come to being? What are the differences between the political economy of development of China and postwar Japan? So these are the reasons why I'm looking at this area and try to find an answer to this. My arguments are following. I was adopting Ranka Desai's uneven and combined development theory to explain contender developments in US-led global capitalism. This paper also argues that postwar Japan's economic reconstruction and nation building was based on political dependence on the US and resulted in its limited contender developments to the US dominance. And I further argues that China is able to continue and deepen its content development in face of mounting US pressures, different to Japan, because of primitive socialist accumulation, which compete with and restricts capitalist accumulation. So there are basically two modes of accumulations in China. I argue that China is a transitional economy, that these are the contending forces competing in China. But the PSA is the backbone for China's contending development to US imperialism. Now, just some background, the US has ascended to superpower status, but is not unchallenged. It was producing half of the world's industrial output, with just 6% of the world's population at the end of the Second World War. However, it was very powerful at the time, but it was not without competition. Soviet Union was a very strong competitor to the US at the time. Its victory over Nazism and successive revolutions in the colonized world meant that anti-colonial resistance was popular and had a material ideological backing of the Soviet Union. So, despite the strength of the US, it could not conquer the world. In order to rebuild the world order under its hopefully permanent dominance in the wishes of the US, it required new form of imperialism, which could accommodate the new situations without direct colonial rule. So direct territorial conquest was impossible. So it had to find a new way to establish its dominance. So what the US chose was to establish its dominance through the international financial system, to maintain, also to contain the influence of communism. So to make sure that communism bloc is not expanding and the US can influence for as much as it could with the use of US votes. So a succession of unstable arrangements, military and economic actions were pursued, including the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Bretton Woods system, how it developed and then also being abandoned, the construction of the dollar Wall Street regime, that is the concept developed by Peter Gowan, the deepening of financialization, deregulation of global financial markets, etc., of course, including neoliberal doctrines. So these are all the actions taken by the US to try to build up and enforce its hegemonic project. I'm using Rothko's ideas or concept of uneven and combined development to explain that on one hand, the US seems to be very dominating, but on the other hand, there are also combined developments which actually challenge this domination. So this concept was originated from the Russian Revolution. The concept was aimed to show that it was possible for the working class to overthrow Tsarism and start the overturn of the capitalist order worldwide. So colonialism, imperialism created an uneven world. So a high and uneven distribution of industries in the world concentrated in the advanced capitalist states is also existed between and within regions and within those states themselves. The world market was occupied between leading industrialized powers. So unevenness was expanding. At the same time, there was also combined development as well. There was coexistence of the most advanced capitalist industry with pre-capitalist social, political, and cultural institutions within states. These states also within the colonial regions as well. There were coexistence of advanced industry. At the same time, there were like preservation of, for example, the feudal social relations in the colonized places, so that this subservient position of these colonized countries would be maintained. So, but these are not just going to be forever, they also create opportunities and also real securities as well. Whether the colonial regions are able to catch up and skip the intermediate stages after the overthrowing the capitalist postwar dictatorship in their own country depend on their economic and cultural capacities, such as an ability to protect itself, act implementally, and mobilize and employ resources and assets. So Rocketers proposes a version of combined, aka contender development, where the backward states obtained political will and capacity industrialized in order to reach the developmental level of the most advanced states. So that means colonized countries, they developed have the developmental idea that they want to reach the same level of the advanced country. They are not satisfied with just being subservient to it, and this is combined development. So rather than accepting complementarity with the most advanced states, so yes. So for the size argument, she argued that Cold War is actually a way for exporting financing. So it's also a way to make the US dollars as the world, try to make it as a world currency, and then can dominate the world through the US dollar that the US spend. And so just before the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950, the US decided to generate the required capital cycles by embarking on a gigantic program of rearmament and military and economic aid to key frontline anti-communist regimes, and to revive West Germany and Japan as key industrial blocs to US power. And the infamous NSC 68 sector that is policy that they express clearly what to plan. So as a result, the US actually further its economic decline because it's actually building up multiple industrial competitors. And that is what the side termed as combined development. So the world has reached a stage where it is becoming increasingly difficult for the US to externalize its problems. Doesn't mean that it hasn't tried, and there were some battles that the US has won, but it actually continuing its economic decline regardless. Those other industrialized countries, they are coming up, and this time they are through the help and assistance of the United States. And it is ironic that the United States needed them to be industrialized so that the US could build its hegemonic program. So this is the dialectical development inside this supposedly hegemonic system. So the Japan and West Germany's industrial development arguably outpaced the US by the 1970s. They became strong contender developments in the US-led world order. So here is the graph to show that the GDP per capita for Japan for 10 years from 1987 to 1997 is GDP per capita was higher than the US. And you can see that Germany during those times also getting very close, and so in some years exceeded the United States. But Japan's act was more clear in this graph. And you also can tell the productivity growth as well from this contender state in this period, that the productivity of them actually grow higher and than the US. And the US, you can see that it has remained relatively on a low rate of growth as early as from the 1960s. And Japan was growing until the middle of the 1990s. So Japan during those times was maybe argued that successfully catch up with this. So on the surface, Japan seems to be doing exceedingly well, and it seems to be a very qualified and development. But we have to remember how this actually comes to form. Japan was under the US occupation during 1945 and 1952. The early period of this occupation was termed as so-called controlled revolution, because the US plan for it was to keep the emperor as single under parliamentary regime while pursuing purging militarism from politics and granting extensive civil rights and trying to really to deindustrialize Japan, to just make Japan not as what we see today. And they actually tried to dismantle the financial industrial organ. It was very powerful. They're still very powerful today. But the original plan was to dismantle them. But the Chinese Revolution that succeeded in 1949 actually changed the US plan. Because the US do not want to see other communist successful revolutions in Asia. So it reversed its course. Is confirmed with the outbreak of the Korean War in 1940. So the focus shifted from demilitarization to making Japan a bulwark against communists. So how did they do that? They restored power of the purged right-wing politicians and bureaucrats and used those people who were considered successfully leading Japan's industrial drive during the Second World War. And then restoring them to power and to carry out US plan for reindustrializing Japan. It also was encouraged to set up ministry to dedicating on the industrial planning and also carry out coordination of the Saibas to utilize, to make use of the US financial and technical assistance so that to really build up Japan. So this was under the US encouragement and also direct help as well. So at the same time, the Cold War, the two hot wars in Asia during the Cold War period, Japan benefited hugely from it. Is companies got contracts for the US military and also seized the opportunity to upgrade their industrial capacities as well. Having economies of scale and also with the assistance from the US so that it actually can actually upgrade itself. By the late 70s, MITI recognized that now for Japan, they have almost reached the catching up target. So they need to move into the next stage to actually to be more innovative, actually to be leader. It's not just like reaping the technologies that existing. They need to be the front leaders. They need to explore into places that wasn't explored. So does it sound familiar? Like what successful catch-up economies? That is the plan they want to do. They don't satisfy just being like a good player. They want to actually think in some advanced technological fields as well. However, this contender development of Japan's economic strength is limited by political dependence on the US, which actually was laid in as early as its nation building. The legitimization of the conservatives and the manipulation of the history problem together with the preservation of the emperor, the manufacturing of the non-Asian identity system has made Japan dependent on the West from the very beginning. The restored Japanese elite infected a collective amnesia on the state role as perpetrator of war crimes and suppressed dissident view that actually disagreeing with the right-wing view on history. This left-leaning press and intellectual was suppressed by the state as well as powerful pressure. As the US priorities changed when the so-called threat of Cold War changed, that means the facilitated conditions for the state-led national capitalism actually began to cease in the 1980s. The circles of Western trained technocrats, economists, think tanks, as well as the corporations depending on foreign market became the dominant fields and pushed for market-oriented reforms in Japan, and they were successful. Neoliberal reforms was pushed in Japan, and so you can see that from the well-known data about the low growth, below 1% growth for sustained period stagnation of Japan that is that is accompanying the neoliberal reforms that is practiced in Japan. And I am using a quote here from Cummings, who is an expert in East Asian history. He concluded that Japan's sun was to rise either not too high enough to cause great problems for the allies in declining industries, but not so high as to threaten leading-edge industries, let alone confer a defensive industrial advantage. So, from Cummings, yes, Japan was able to outcompete the industries in America, but not those ones that are actually at the leading edges. So, after all these years, Japan has not been able to really replace the US in the leading technology sectors. Net investment in Japan has dropped close to zero after 2000. Why? In Sato's article explained that because in order to restore the rate of profit, the capitalists in Japan, they found a way to restore it. That is by non-investing. So what they relied on was further like eroding the workers' rights, liberal reforms, and to go for the financial sector to seek for higher profits through financial investment instead of productive investment. And the expectation for Japan's share of the world GDP in 2060 will fall to 50% by that point. And the socio-economic crisis in Japan is dire. It's facing a serious demographic crisis and threat for militarization. As we can see on the news that Japan is poised to join AUKUS, is having 16% rise in 2024 defense budget, and is also deepening their liberals. So it has taken Japan a long way from contender to become complementary to the US. For the PRC, from the very beginning, they obtained political independence. During the 1920s, there was like an attempt to try to follow so-called two-stage revolution. That means they would need to rely on the national postwar to lead a national revolution and then towards socialism. But it didn't work out. As we understand from history, there were like purges, KMT-led purges and massacres of communists and activists at the height of the anti-imperialist national movement in the late 1920s. At the time when the CPC was actually in alliance with KMT. So these KMT is the nationalist bourgeois part. So after all these bloody lessons, the CPC, as the proletarian vanguard and leader of the working masses, the history told them that they were the only force capable of carrying out their reform anti-imperialist struggle. The victory in 1949 meant that the completion of democratic revolution for an independent country by the establishment of a proletarian dictatorship and the beginning of the transition to socialism. Transition to socialism, not to socialism. So the CPC-led PRC achieved political and national independence. The new state required a mode of production for socialist accumulation. So in order to transition to socialism, you need accumulation. You need the productive forces to develop so that they can have the socialized production scale, so can actually have the required material basis for building socialism. Let alone after all these years of exploitation and transfer of services outside of its colonized economies to the imperialist state. So the first 5-year plan from 1953 was the start of what Soviet economist Pierre Shensky would have called primitive socialist accumulation. I argue that this actually is existing in China. It actually is competing with the law of value. And the consolidation and growth of the state-owned industries and the public sectors require resources from the world economy. So it's not enough to have your own accumulation. Because you need to develop the economy, have the economies of scale, and you need resources, also obtain, like, able to sell your products and also get the receipts back. So you need to have connection with the world economy. So this has created opportunity and as well as risk. But for China, it's inside China, they optimized domestic capitalist, strict of independent political agency, operate within a market established and dominated by state actors, and the financial system dominated by state banks. So the profit constrained and redirected by state planning towards social objectives. This institutional setup underpinning the CP's policy of utilization, restriction, and transformation of private capitalist enterprise. This has remained at the core of PRC's economy. The opportunity that we see that PRC sees in the 1970s with the Nixon's visit and then the kind of establishing the relationship with the US, getting accepted into the WTO, all these gave an opportunity for large-scale capitalist accumulation in China at the same time emboldening the PSA first. It's not just one side. Concessions were made in order to obtain foreign investment, but the planning mechanism has not been replaced. It has been revamped, but it has not been replaced, and public ownership of land remains. So this is the graph that I created to explain there were two modes of accumulations in China, and they are unity of opposites. So through the financial system, as I argued, as I explained earlier, that's how the private capitalists, they also have a role to play in helping the primitives such as accumulation. It doesn't mean that it will always be like that. It's a competing relationship. So whether they would gain enough political power to overcome the PSA, that is also a possibility. But for what I can see now, they have not succeeded. They actually is furthering the PSA. But the contradictions and struggle between these two modes of accumulation, they are constant and will not reach an equilibrium due to competition. So it is yes, ongoing. And another word here. So you see under the social, yes. So because of this competition and there is a zigzag development path in China. So that we can see the struggles that's ongoing and can be intensified as each mode of productions they actually advance to the next step. And in closing, I want to show you this is the graph that shows gross fixed capital formation. As we can see this as productive investment in property. So China has been staying on a relatively high level of productive investment compared to the United States and Japan. So despite all these pressures that's applied to China, it has been able to resist the financialization tendency, which we see in Japan in the last decades. China has maintained a high ratio of productive investment, and this is a very important indicator to show that China is not like Japan. This has not been incorporated into the US-led financial system. Actually, it's demonstrating its consistency. So, in conclusions, US hegemonic project has forced the industrial reconstruction of former rivals such as Germany and gave rise to contender development. But the common interest of the ruling classes in anti-communism and financialization set limits to the extent of the contender development and even turned it into complementary development. China is not Japan from the beginning. It has maintained political independence after overthrowing the US-backed neo-bourgeois dictatorship, whereas Japan's conservative militaries relied on US support to regain power. Japan's post-war economic revival was due to the US need for containment of the communist bloc, and its decades of stagnation since the 1990s was a result of the global coalition of finance capital. But China's plan to develop new productive forces and to address unbalanced growth in face of US extensive sanctions, large-scale quantitative easing, financialization demonstrate China's state capacity is supported by a lower capitalist accumulation regime. What I would argue is primitive socialist accumulation for meeting socialist objectives, which provides the material basis for contender development against the US. So, in closing, political independence and economic development are both crucial for sustained contender development. I think these are the comparisons of these two cases. So, thank you.
We can have 6 minutes for Q&A on this.
Yeah, no, just also really interesting. I'm just wondering, how do you see Brenner's thesis of overproduction in the US fitting into the kind of fruit of socialist accumulation?
Sorry, can you say what document from the US?
So Brenner, the crisis of Brenner.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, Brenner. So there's this idea that by the 1970s, the US had sort of done too much fixed capital accumulation and therefore it produced too much, and that was leading to falling prices and falling profitability. And so that is arguably part of the reason why the US was like easing trade restrictions on China. So the US capitalists were looking for cheap labor in the US was becoming too expensive. So even like in the like during the Mao era, like there were lots of really good improvements in education, healthcare, and I'd like to expect to see an interesting group, but they weren't able to translate that into like effective industrial policy. So it wasn't really until that, like around the Nixon time, I remember those inflation started to ease, which is which I think Brenner would argue is related to like this crisis of overaccumulation, overproduction in the US. So would PSA have been possible, do you think, without the easing of like US trade sanctions on China, or was that integration into kind of US supply chains through like the economic export-oriented industry and the free trade zone and so on? Was that necessary? Did you need to have that kind of US trade leadership in the PSA to be effective?
Okay. Well, I think it's hard to imagine what history because we can only analyze what has happened. So I don't think that is really the only opportunity for China to develop to just join the US led one. But it was the historical circumstances that was the Soviets, China was late. So, and also China's heavy industrialization was actually first built by the Soviet in the 50s. So those machines and equipment, they actually were reaching the exhaustion vicinity. So China, in order to continue its industrialization, will need resources outside itself. And also there were immense pressures in China under Western sanctions all those years that relying on your own internal accumulation to continue industrialization is also reaching the breaking point. So, so that provided the opportunity for China. But for the US, because of its overaccumulation also, I think it's inherent in the capitalist system that it is reaching these kind of common problems of overaccumulation. Underlying of it is the rate of profits, tendency of rate of profits to fall. So capitalists always want to seek higher profit and also want to seek profit without going through the pain of production. So I think that is why the US capitalists were also supporting this move to kind of to use China to isolate. So because it was having a lot of pressures, but the Vietnam War, don't forget, the fiscal deficit they were starting to do all the time. So I think, yes, we need to look at from the historical context.
Hi, thanks very much. So I've got 4 points, some of which are more trivial than others. So starting with the most, right? I think it's a bit strange to talk about Japan without talking about the banking crisis at the end of the 1990s, which has huge effects. So your broad sweep, I think, should say something about it. Okay, secondly, oh yeah, Prigozhinsky and primitive socialist accumulation. Well, Prigozhinsky was advocating a sort of an extraction of surplus labour from the peasantry or to fund industrialisation, and the method he proposed was under exchange in terms of prices. The socialist products would be priced expensively and what actually happened, of course, was that richer, when these price movements were big, richer peasants just said, "Solve this, I'm didn't sell." So what Stalin did was just impose completely brutally. The result was spectacular industrialisation, spectacular famine, spectacular labour transition from countryside to the cities. There was no democracy. It's not, to call it socialist is really strange in any sort of sense of the 19th century sense of the word. So I think one should be a little bit careful around terminology. It was, in historical terms, it was a pretty unique path to development. It wasn't a terribly stable path. It wasn't a terribly successful path as it turned out. But to call it socialist just isn't wrong. Thirdly, thirdly, I'm not sure I buy this idea of investment. In particular, the US Fed, Federal Reserve Bank, through its currency swap program, is effectively the reserve bank. The only safe asset, widely recognized internationally in Beijing as well as New York, is the Treasury, short-term Treasury. And the US backstops that market. It backstops short-term money markets worldwide. And I think that's really important to talk about US relative decline. Some wishful thinking. And then lastly, and my biggest point is the overall framework. It seems to me to reverse, and it's maybe no bad thing. It seems to me to reverse traditional lines of causation. The traditional, in Marxist systems, the traditional lines of causation go from the economy to the state. But you're doing exactly the opposite. This whole framework is doing exactly the opposite. It's going from state actions to the economy. And maybe that's the right thing to do, but it overturns Marxism. You should just acknowledge that, be upfront about it. When I said that the US Fed backstops the world, the reason the world recovered very much was there were 2 reasons. One was the entirely unannounced currency swap program. The other was massive Chinese expansion, the decision in late 1990s. 20 millions, right? 20 millions more in 20. But that absolutely extraordinary expansion of states. And that was the other thing that we looked into together with defense finance. Those were 2 major events. And there's no getting away from that. It seems to me you can't deny that. You just have to think about how does this integrate into an overall theoretical. Doesn't seem to me to match US time, and it also problematizes classical notions of state is dependent on the because it doesn't seem to be established. Anyway, those are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Make a response.
Thank you very much for the comments, Simon. Yes. I think your first point will definitely mention prices. Revolutionary, I have to say I disagree with that. I think that is a mischaracterization by a lot of people that he just insisted on privatization and services on the peasantry for industrialization. If you read his new he talks about it needs external. It's not my idea, it's actually the resources that you need to be connection between both to have external resources and so yes, I understand people will argue it's not socialist because our paper. So I think that needs to become target. It's a very also as a convention. Why he use this term, I think because it also recognizes the extraction of the services is not as counter-competition as it should. But in order to do the accumulation that's needed seems the process that it go through. US decline, I don't think I would have time to go to that debate because there's lots of people talking about it. So, but we can see kind of multipolarity has emerged. So, well, let's see what's going to happen. I will make it address it a bit more in my papers. Not yes, the refusal of the framework. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. But I also think that Peter Fogle has pointed out that a lot of the Marxist theories we have ignored the political side effects. So we have not paid enough attention to how policies actually affected the building of contending tendencies, basically. So I think that is what I wanted to bring, and it is something that I'm learning myself as well. So thank you for listening.
Sorry, so I noticed that the Tiara is not connected. So we have about possibility now for Salam and myself as a strategy. But I think that the title of the presentation was quite ambitious. Actually, my presentation is much less than that. So we just focusing on the economic methods, actually from all the very complex geopolitical, international systems, etc. And also, I'll be looking at the long-term trends rather than the times of major trends that we are witnessing. Now, I would like to pose quickly to the body of the presentation and then get back to the highlights later if you have time. But let me start with the latest release of the World Development Report 2024 about the middle income trap. And in that report, the World Bank first of all find almost for the first time find the actual performance of world development over the past 3 decades actually quite disappointing, and also the future prospects look quite pessimistic. And China, incidentally, has been put on top of the list of countries confronting the risk of middle income trap. And of course, the middle income trap implying the quite pessimistic outlook for world development, because the so-called middle income economies they account for a majority share of the world population, 75%. Right? And also to be another way, the proportion of high-income economies in the population, proportion of world over actually has been decreasing quite persistently. Even in the beginning of the era of I think it's 25% by 2023, 17%. So it seems exceedingly difficult to cross the threshold income, high income economy. Now, meanwhile, the average income level of all the middle income economies as a proportion of as a ratio to the level of high income economies has tended to fall unless we include China as part of the middle income economy, but China looks like an exception that the rest of the world, excluding China, that the trend is quite clear, decreasing. And then we have, as we can have a look at this, the table 1, which gives you the indication of the general trend. And then we put it in a look at the broader picture, looking at the OECD countries, because they are ins and outs of the members of high-income economies. But then for the OECD, that there are only entries, no exits. Over the past 3 decades, we medium-scale countries in terms of population, Mexico, South Korea, and then the OECD. Otherwise, all the others are small countries. You can see the average growth rate that the OECD top of which countries has the growth rate slightly and consistently above that of the rest of the excluding China. So divergent, first of all, divergence between the rich and poor countries. And secondly, that both groups of countries have undergone slowdown of growth quite dramatically. Now, compared to what's known as the golden age of capitalism. Now, as we have seen, China is always an exception, and this exception is quite a dramatic picture. But if you look at the per capita GDP as a basis for OECD, you can see what has happened to the developing world, that is world total, excluding OECD, excluding China, the full curve, which underwent the quite dramatic decline in the first 4 decades of globalization, and at some rebound, but still not back to the level the 1960s or the beginning of the globalization. And you can see China is the only exception. In fact, 2022, China's income level was about 97% of the ratio of high-income economies. So that will slightly decline over the past 2 years because of exchange rate movements. Now, China's population is slightly bigger than that of OECD. So for the first time in human history, China is to cross the threshold of the high-income economy status, that the total population of living in high-income economies would be doubled. That is the significance of the China exception. But then, what are the implications of this from these indicators? First, looking at the mainstream establishments, the policy prescriptions for the coping with the loss of development and divergence. Now, the emphasis is very much on policy and in particular national development policies, or more precisely, the emphasis on enhancing the competitiveness of national economies in the face of this development, miserable development performance. So the World Development Report argues that it is necessary for developing countries to adopt a so-called 3I strategy for getting out of the miserable condition of our development. First, the emphasis on investment, always necessary in all stages of the developments. And then for the so-called lower middle income economy, in addition for investment, it needs so-called infusion, that is importing and applying the import technology. And then entering the upper middle income economies, and they should focus on, in addition to investment and infusion, also involved in innovation. So that including world frontier technology, you can see immediately that the emphasis on investment is no more than is equivalent to the emphasis on capability building, which deviates fundamentally from the market fundamentalism of the Washington consensus, whereby the emphasis is get the relative prices right, get the property rights right. That is, the market will automatically work out deliver development if you get the markets. But now, the incentive alone is not sufficient. You need in addition to so-called efficient market, you need so-called active states in order to be able to promote the development of the capability, the building up of capability and development. So, in a sense, incorporating the core elements of the right world doctrines, formerly known as the developmental state literature, which now the Washington institution want to include in that the core projects, and not by coincidence the same apply to the advanced countries. So the new Washington consensus, which also wanted to put the emphasis on the building up capability with need the active state as the necessary condition to do so for coping with all the challenges they are facing. And of course, the foundation for all this emphasis on capability building to enhance the competitiveness of national economies in the world market. The foundation of these prescriptions ultimately is one thing, is competition in the world market, and more precisely, the pressure of competition from China, which is also labeled as a distorted market competition from China. Why is this a distorted competition? Then we need to have it's clearly that the competition has become destructive to well-developed competition from China. And this is not new, but that since the beginning of this century, when China started to have the explosive expansion in national trade, and then it first started with the scholarly work on the work that China is facing or crowding out the industry of the rest of the developing world. That's the beginning, and that's more recently the same arguments are advanced countries that China is facing for helping out the industries of the advanced countries, and the foundation for China's ability to do so is because of all kinds of distortions, ultimately in the form of the overcapacity in China. And we are hearing all these China's overcapacity, and therefore the destructive the world development, both in the developing and advanced countries. Now, however, overcapacity is a problematic concept or conception to relate it to the systemic picture of world development. Excess capacity is a matter of sectoral industrial issue. How could it become a systemic aggregate cause of underdevelopment? That is problematic that earlier, before China moving on to the development of capital-intensive industries, in particular green technology industries, which are, of course, the number one targets of the US, the EU, and some others have followed, like Canada, Japan, etc., impose restrictions or to block China's development of these new industries. But before that, when China was the world factory in supplying labor-intensive, low value-added products, this was praised by the advanced countries that is the best successive share of the Federal Reserve or the Ministry of the Treasury of the US. They have successively placed that performance, and including Janet Yellen when she was the Minister of Treasury. She actually said that this is best that China produces and US consumes. Now it becomes to become criticisms. And criticism in a variety of ways, but ultimately says that because of China's economic system and policies are distorting the competition in the form of subsidizing the Chinese industries. But of course, when it comes to the green technology industries, subsidizing is actually a quite general phenomenon because it's almost consensus that the market would not be able to deliver the development of green technology industries that are required for coping with the climatic change. So subsidizing is actually the general issues. So the problem is that the appropriate way of subsidizing whether or not China is practicing dumping. But it seems most unlikely because as we can easily observe that the selling prices of Chinese green technology products, like electric cars, the selling prices in the EU, in the overseas markets, in the world market, are much higher than the selling prices in China's domestic markets. That is opposite to dumping. So to say that overcapacity causes systemic development loss, that requires additional concept, which is known as the global savings glut, which says that the global savings glut implies underconsumption of overinvestment by China, and therefore causing all the problems in the world economy. Is this true? But we can actually have a quick look at the world scale picture. That is true that China has undergone, has recorded a continuous increase in, or at least in terms of long-term trend of the saving rates compared to the 1970s. We can see from 36%, 34 to 36 to 43. But then you can see the opposite has happened to OECD and also the rest of the developing world. And in fact, on the world scale, there's no such thing of excess investments. Insofar as there is insufficient systemic insufficient demand for the world economy, it is arguable that underinvestment is more likely the case than the cause compared to underconsumption. That's the first point that as opposed to the claim of the global savings glut and underconsumption. The world picture actually is underinvestment. And the second point to make is that precisely because of this underinvestment in the rest of the world compared to China, and that accounts for the disparity in terms of the growth of the economy, China vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And this being the case, we can say that, and as a matter of fact, the claim of underconsumption is not just made by the mainstream establishment, U.S. government, U.S. officials of economies such as Paul Krugman, etc. It's not just that, but quite a large number of left-wing scholars have also rely very much on such claim that the kind, as we know, the underconsumptionism has always been a theory that appears in not just in the ideological right, the ideological left as well, and that gave rise to, that has given rise to the arguments of the picture we have seen, with the focus on market which is conceptualized as a kind of imperialist rivalry between China and the existing imperial power, but that if underconsumption is less convincing compared to underinvestment as the explanation of the miserable performance of world development, then we can say that China has served as a countervailing power to the underinvestment, which of course underinvestment, we know that exists a big literature from the Marxists and post-Keynesian that underinvestment is caused either by profitability decline, or tendency of profitability decline, or financialization. But if both are being associated with liberal capitalism or capitalism in any form, then China in the world economy might then be seen as serving as a countervailing force against this overall chain of world capitalism. So that's my presentation of this sense. So we are running out of time, but in fact, basic questions was for me, but Sam-Kee and for Salam. Alex first.
So thank you for your presentations. I have a very short question to you. I realize comparing Japan and China. I was wondering if you could make a parallel, if possible, the Plaza Accord achieved by the US somehow led the devaluation service vis-a-vis the Japanese yuan. And to compare this movement from 1985 Plaza Accords with what's going on right now with the US led trade war. So what are the similarities? What are the differences? Why there are similarities? Why there are differences?
I think just to be sure, because the differences is China is able to say no when Japan would not. Japan would not say no to the US. When the US asked it to raise its contribution by unbelievable ratio and comply, but China has been able to defend itself and live as its own place. So that is another example to show the independence of PLC.
Okay. Any more questions?
Please, someone there. Michael
That's it. My next question.
Michael, do you want to unmute yourself?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Well, thanks very much, Dick. I did send a quick chat message, but what you said it's an excellent paper because I think the World Bank report is a really good basis for discussing what's going on in the major in all the global South economies, and it points out, as you say clearly, what is needed, as it were, to break from the so-called middle income trap. But what is interesting in the World Bank report is that China is not regarded as a model for achieving this breakout from the middle income trap. There is no mention of China as a model. What is offered by the World Bank is 3 other countries as case studies for breaking out: Chile, Poland, and Korea. But what do you make of that, Dick? China does not come into the equation for the World Bank, but only these 3 different countries based on basically market economies.
Yeah, I think it's really strange that moving up the income, the hierarchy of income levels, that China is left out in the World Development Report. When it talks about the challenges, China was put on top of the list. When it talks about how to cope with challenges, China was left out. And the three countries being the place as the model for the rest of the world, they are, of course, they are mostly middle-sized economies, and also they, in a sense, they are quite different from China. That both in terms of the economic system and also in terms of the size of the economy. Now, my take is that the so-called free eye strategy suffers from the fallacy of composition. If everyone is to enhance competitiveness in the world market, that will cancel out each other, given that at a systemic level, that the development performance has been that. So some to come up successfully would necessarily imply that some others cannot achieve the same outcome. So the same strategy as a panacea for everyone looks quite bizarre. So I think that is really often at least intrinsic difficulty with the world development process.
I guess one of the, we talked about, I didn't follow all of it, but you're talking about primitive accumulation in the context of an area that went through like 40 years of civil war and war coming out of, was it 1949, right? So China was in worse shape than what I did from my readings, and the Soviets were, the Bolsheviks were when they came to power in 1917. At least in terms of per capita income and development. Right? I guess the issue, I have is in terms of the primitive model of primitive accumulation. It looks like you had historically different policies that went on from one period to another, with some sources of development aid coming from several different sources, but then later primarily internally developed. Okay. I guess the issue is it seems to be a delicate balance. I looked on your website, the Chinese, well, not yours, the Chinese government says it's a Chinese form of market socialism. All right. So, to what extent is it still based on Marx and the labor theory of value, and to what extent is the market to have financial markets? What role have these financial markets played in the accumulation process? Okay. Where does capital accumulation? You have a delicate mix between the government sector, which presumably represents, at least has some input from the working class, and a large capitalist sector, okay, which has private equity markets. Okay, and equity, what are, from Marxist perspective, equity markets are a claim on surplus value. So in some sense, you still have surplus value, and it's still used as a mechanism for accumulation. Okay. I assume that. So, so the issue is, where does it become primitive? If the assumption is that the government, whatever it represents, okay, there's different interpretations. The government is using the surplus to accumulate. So, if presumably if it's done by the working class, it's a delicate balance between how far you want the market to go and how far you want the central planning. If, you know, and again, there's a big debate about democracy, who's controlling the process. But what I understand is the Communist Party in China is huge, like 91 million people or so. And you still have capitalists that belong to the Communist Party. Okay, so I assume that there's a delicate tension between all the people that are trying to put together development policy, primitive accumulation, in order to generate what you had. So in terms of comparisons in Japan, I think there's quite, you indicated a lot of stark differences. And one of the things that you might want to comment on Japan. My reading of Japan is that you had, I always get mixed up, you had the industrial groups, Sabatsu versus Britsu. And I think during the occupation,